Thank you so much, dear colleagues. It's an honor for me to speak to you today. The title of my short presentation is Listening to the Mystery, Perspectives for the Work of the Church in the Afternoon, a kind of psychotherapy for the Church. I would like to share with you the ideas that come into my mind when I read these pages, these two chapters, but also when I read Tomáš Halík again and again. I would like to formulate three perspectives that I think could be interesting for the Church when we talk about the afternoon of the Christianity. In the first perspective is an existential approach for the Church, the big question of mission and synodality in front of the mystery of the faith. Secondly, I would like to underline the significance of the anthropological perspective in our time, or the anthropological hermeneutic, what determines the practice of the Church. And lastly, the spiritual perspective rounds off my paper. The first one, synodal missionary perspective. In the Catholic Church, we are currently struggling with what it means to be a synodal church. Many aspects that Tomáš Halík addresses in chapters 2 and 14 are important, I think, for being a synodal church. I would like to emphasize one which is important in the context of the faith as mystery, the ability to listen, to seek, to understand one other. The seek, we will never understand, I think, but the seek, the wish to understand. It is an act of going beyond ourselves, an act of self-transcendence. Why it is necessary for a missionary church to listen? Pope Francis once said, if you want to know what the Church teaches, go to the magisterium. But if you want to know how people believe, then ask them, listen to the people. Yes, if we speak of synodality in practice, or we want to learn synodality as a new style of the Church in mission, then we must learn to go to the people, to listen to the people. We must want to understand how people believe, how they suffer, struggle for their next step in their life, what bears them up, and so on. This act of listening transforms the listener, transforms the tired church. Today we speak about a so-called integral understanding of mission, whose origin is the Trinitarian dynamic of love. And mission means to make tangible this love. If mission is understood as the existential raison d'être of the Church, and if church life takes place within a mission that goes beyond itself to listening, to being by the people, can mission also be understood as a self-transcendence of church that protects the church from becoming sick, that means self-centeredness. Pope Francis calls this self-centeredness of the church is the source of evil of times past, also from today, I think. The self-transcendence is the ignorance of the self-centeredness is the ignorance of the mystery of the faith. Of course, when we listen to the people, we will be confronted with the diversity of the faith, how people believe, what are their wants. A church in mission is inspired by this diversity. She has momentum tremendum and fascinosum in front of the drama of the life. A church in mission does not seek its own security, its past power, does not recruit people, and does not weep our past golden times. A synodal church in mission does not focus on itself, but on people's own and very personally journey with God, on the drama of their life. Listening is one of the key words of the synodal process. Listening leads to the reality, to the polyphony of the Logos, to the beauty of the Catholicity in the really meaning of the word, as the very virtue of the Church, to the mystery of the faith. However, this confrontation must then in turn draw on the Church's inherent competence of polyphony. From this power of diversity, of the listening to the people, can result the reforms that are not our tune. Listening is an act that calls for a heart formation, for an intellectual heart, calls for immersing in the logic of the incarnation to can shape this diversity. The second one, the anthropological perspective. In light of the missionary synodal perspective as presented, it becomes apparent that the work of the Church in the afternoon also needs an anthropological perspective. Maybe a good question could be, what do we trust human to do? What Church actors think of people, of the human being, shapes the form of their practice. Wrong images of the human lead to wrong dealings with people and to irrelevant church practice if we ignore the really own capacity, ability of the people. For example, it would be fatal to have an image of human beings that ignore the freedom of the human beings, will and does his or her spiritual abilities, such as the ability to love, the ability to act, and the ability to suffer. A church praxis will be convincing if it works with the existentially available, but inactive or partially active abilities. Viktor Frankl explained what these abilities means. I quote, "Man is not here to observe himself and to reflect himself. He is here to surrender himself, to go himself away, to surrender in recognition and love." Quote end. Existential analysis, according to Viktor Frankl, regards human beings as spiritual beings. Their capacity for self-transcendence and self-distance is based on this spirituality. From these two abilities, they make use of their physical and psychological conditions to face and take up the broader experience. I quote, "Man is not free from his conditions, but free in how he wants to behave towards them." Quotation end. In church practice, a space could be created in which people can work on attitude modulation, on how they can freely take a stand on external and internal conditions, and events through their behavior for their own good and for the good of others. A common good, solidarity and compassion built on the human experience that the ability to love and the capacity to suffer are difficult to separate and are necessary for the good life. Every human being has these abilities, even if these abilities are not always obviously active and functioning. The anthropological perspective directs the view of the church activities to the mystery of the human being and at the same time prevents it from thinking in an ecclesiocentric way. For the work of the church, from the anthropological perspective, that tiny gap in which human beings can and may act responsibly but which has not been opened, but is discovered by them as a space for free action, becomes important. The exploration of such freedom of action in the most difficult conditions of life presupposes humility and is the only way to defy nihilism and prepare the way for humanism. The third one, the last one, spiritual perspective. The spiritual perspective points to the importance of spiritual processes in the work of the Church, which can also be understood as processes of maturing into Christ. For the work of the Church, the promotion of spiritual competences of human beings is also the activation of their spiritual dimension. Spiritual opportunities enable more and more people to become loving beings in the sense of being made in the image of God. Spiritual processes can also be understood as a processes of becoming. In the struggle to find optimal answers for oneself and for one's environment, which one is willing and able to take responsibility for, the person grows in his or her humanity. Coping with ever-increasing and more complex, tragic and sorrowful aspects in life is a permanent spiritual challenge that can only be mastered selectively ad personam and ad situationem, and not once and for all. Spiritual processes are of existential importance in situations of uncertainty, instability, and permanent struggle. In the context of human existence, spiritual processes train the human being's capacity for love. A spiritually matured personality can decide for love in every situation, regardless of what they are experiencing or what impulses they are currently receiving from their environment. In this mature personal attitude, the claim to be loved is preceded by a first claim, namely that of loving. God experienced people who gift their environment with love are charismatic and beloved personalities, not because life has spread them suffering, guilt, and death, but because they want to shape life lovingly. The possibility to realize love in advance at any time and under all circumstances. The activation of the capacity to love manifests itself individually in everyday relationships in the world and with God, but it also has a collective phase in a solidarity lived together, maybe religion, religare, to be connected also with each other, not only with God. It's a good expression from the populists to only God. The whole cosmos becomes wider and deeper in value for him, the loving one, in shines in the rays of those values which only the lover sees. For, as is well known, love does not make one blind, but makes one see, value, sighted, mystery sighted. Thank you.